We also thank the Lord and the New Brunswick Friends for this opportunity to fellowship on the theme text of James chapter 1, verse 2. Now we have prepared, and there is posted in the chat a handout, and it serves three functions. First of all, it's a roadmap for our remarks today. We're going to follow it rather closely. Secondly, it's a distillation of the high points from these remarks. And thirdly, it's a reference list if you wish to study further on this subject. Our approach today was really going to be twofold. First of all, we're going to consider James chapter 1, verse 2 in some detail. Secondly, we're then going to consider on a verse-by-verse basis the balance of chapter 1, because we are going to see how it connects to and supports verse 2, the theme. James 1:2. My brethren, count it all joy when ye fall into diverse temptations. This is the first of 15 instances in this epistle where James refers to his brethren by that label. Now, James' brethren, as we might well imagine, are his spiritual brethren. They were spiritual Israelites, whether they were of a Jewish background or heritage or a Gentile background, whoever they were, whichever begotten of the Spirit, they were James' spiritual brethren. Spiritual Israelites, of course, are really the only ones who can view all of life's experiences in a beneficial way at the present time. The whole world will be able to see the benefit eventually, but only spiritual Israelites are able to see the right way, the beneficial way of life experiences, all of life's experiences now. The word diverse in this verse means just that. It means various. It means a wide variety. It means varied in character. The word temptation means to put to proof. It means to put on trial. It means to test, a test that manifests our character. And of course, what manifests our character? What manifests our character is how we exercise our judgment in making decisions. You know, we're constantly faced with making choices. You know, we face the forks in the road, so to speak, quite frequently. And which fork shall we take? You know, one fork may take us down the wrong path. The other fork in the road either takes us to or keeps us on the right fork in the road. The new creature says, go this way. And the wily flesh often says, no, go that way. You know, sometimes it's not a matter of good versus evil. Sometimes it's a matter of good versus better. Which way shall we choose? That's the temptation. That's the choice. Each, of course, has to decide for himself based on his own sanctified conscience. Now, the word count in verse 2 is from a Greek word that means to deem or to consider. James is telling us how we should consider or view our trials, our tests, our experiences. He's talking about attitude. Now, regardless of what our tests or trials may feel like or look like, we should strive to always have the right attitude right now. Notice how pervasive or extensive our proper attitude should be toward our testing experiences. We're not to view our testing experiences with just some joy, but notice the apostle says, look at them with all joy. All literally means 100%. All means all experiences, all the time. All means all. The word joy here means cheerfulness. It means calmly happy. You know, we're talking here about an inner joy. We're talking about a spiritual joy. This joy does not necessarily mean facing our testing experience with a fleshly feeling of happiness. The flesh may not be happy about it at all, and probably most of the time isn't. This joy is one that arises from knowing the text that Brother Dan just read for us, knowing that all experiences work out together to advance our spiritual growth. Now, the King James rendition of the phrase fall into in verse 2 is misleading. You know, when you talk about or think about the phrase to fall into a temptation, that would seem to imply that we've succumbed to a fault, that we've succumbed to a weakness. But that's not the correct thought at all. You and I both know there is absolutely no delight in falling or stumbling into sin or into a wrong course. Every one of us from time to time has stepped into a wrong course. And as soon as our sanctified conscience realizes it, we regret it. A truly consecrated heart never has one bit of spiritual delight in taking a wrong course. So this phrase, fall into, in the King James, cannot and does not mean stepping or stumbling into a wrong course. The phrase fall into is from a Greek word parapipto. Parapipto. The prefix para, P-E-R-I, is a clearly recognizable clue as to the meaning of the entire Greek word. We recognize this word para. We use it in English quite a bit. It means all around. Peri means surrounded. A periscope, as we know, is a visual aid device that allows one to see all around. We've all seen periscopes on a submarine. They put the periscope up and they can see all the way around, 360 degrees. Periodontal literally means surrounding your teeth. A periodontist is one who specializes in what's around the teeth. A periodontal disease would be a disease of the gums or of the bone or any of the tissue, tissue that surrounds and supports our teeth. So para means all around. The suffix pipto, P-I-P-T-O, means to come to or to encounter or to face something. So the full thought here, if we put the full word together, the full thought of parapipto means to encounter all around. It means to face things that are all around us. Not just encounter from one direction or another direction, but to encounter from all directions. Parapipto means to encounter all around, but it does not mean to stumble or to fall into. There's a wide difference between facing or encountering a test on one hand and entering into a wrong course on the other hand. Now, if we offer an oversimplified paraphrase of what we've been suggesting that James 1:2 actually says, it might read something like this. My dear fellow spiritual Israelites, always consider it a spiritual delight when you are surrounded with a wide variety of tests that prove your loyalty in a variety of ways. Let's go on to verse 3. Knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. Now, verse 2 told us we need to view all our trials in the right attitude if we're going to benefit from them. In verse 3, James says, I'm going to help you to maintain that delightful attitude toward being tested. Knowing this, in other words, here's what you need to know in order to maintain spiritual joy about trials and testings. Now, the word faith in this text is from a Greek word that means convictions. And as we know, a conviction is a firmly held belief. Now, James is not just talking about our desires or our hopes. He is talking about our firmly held beliefs. He is talking about your Christian convictions and my Christian convictions. In simple words, he's talking about our consecration. He says our consecration will be put to the test. Will our Christian convictions, will our Christian consecration withstand the test? Will it hold up under trial? Or will it fade? Will it fail when put to the test? For example, if our conviction is to do the will of God under every conceivable circumstance that we possibly can, if that conviction is put to the test, will the test show, will it reveal that we are true to that conviction? Or will it show a willingness to do our own will, or perhaps to compromise? If we see personal advantage by compromising the will of God, will we remain fixed in our conviction if that conviction is tested? If our convictions do hold up under trial, James is assuring us in this text that success will result. He assures us that such success will work patience. Now, to work patience means to do what? It means to accomplish patience. It means to achieve it. It means to develop it. The word patience is from the Greek word meaning cheerful constancy, cheerful endurance. Cheerful constancy means when tested, we do not compromise to a wrong course. We do not succumb to that wrong course. But it doesn't mean just that we won't compromise or stumble. Cheerful constancy means more than that. Cheerful constancy means that we do not murmur or complain, in the midst of the tests that Brother Dan just mentioned, that we recall that same discourse as well, Brother Dan, that Brother Tim Krupa gave. I thought I heard a murmur. A paraphrase of what James is saying to us in verse 3 might be something like this. When our consecration is put to the test, we can and we should cheerfully endure each test. Do not compromise with the flesh. Do not complain. Complaining is a manifestation of self-will. Verse 4, but let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. Now, the first English word in this text in verse 4, the word but that's used there, is very misleading. The word should be, instead of but, it should be the word yes. The word but is not a good translation of the Greek, because the English word but is used most often to suggest a contrast or an exception to what was just said. For example, if I say to you right now, I am willing to speak with you privately, but I can't do so right at this moment because I'm otherwise engaged. I'm using the word but to create a contrast or to create an exception to my ability, my willingness to speak with you privately. In James verse 3, in the previous verse, James told us that we should face every trial cheerfully and without complaint. In verse 4, James is not creating an exception or a contrast to what he just said in verse 3. Verse 4 is not telling us, oh yes, okay, it's okay sometimes to complain about our experiences. That's not the thought at all. Actually, just the opposite. Verse 4 enlarges on the importance of exercising this cheerful endurance, this cheerful constancy. So here, the Greek word that's translated but is actually used for emphasis, not for contrast. In verse 4, James is saying, yes, let patience have her perfect work. In other words, submit to it, cooperate with it, don't resist it. Let the program work. Yes. Now, what does it mean to let patience have her perfect work? Well, it means to let cheerful constancy, this cheerful steadfastness, this perseverance, to finish her developmental work. Cheerful steadfastness in trial, cheerful perseverance is what produces character growth, as we all know. And this is what James is saying. He is saying, work to let your experiences change you. Let those experiences develop you. Let them perfect you. Character growth comes from being tested and making, or at least trying to make, right choices in our trials. Earnestly practicing making the right choices is what crystallizes and fixes our characters. The last part of verse 4 tells us the result of the exercise. James says it will make us perfect and entire, wanting nothing. Now, the result of always trying to make right choices is not only perfection. That effort to always try to make right choices is also completeness. Well, you might ask yourselves at this point, isn't perfection in this verse and entire, aren't they the same thing? The answer is no. Perfection is one thing, entire is another thing. The word perfect is translated from a Greek word that means finished. It means completed. It means something is done. We know that character development is a process that takes time. We want to get to the end of that process. We're all yearning to get to the end of that process on this side the veil, as Sister Harriet apparently has just done. We want that process to reach finality. We want it to be finished. Not impatiently, by the way. We're just looking forward to it. But the word entire is translated from a totally different Greek word that means complete or whole. Our development might be going quite nicely, maybe even completed in one particular area. Perhaps a particular test that gave us a whole lot of difficulty in the past is maybe not so difficult for us now because by grace we've made progress. Perhaps we've even grown stronger in this one area. And perhaps this one area is now not much of a test at all for us when we face it. Meanwhile, we might be grossly deficient or weak in another area of our character. And James is saying we must cheerfully persevere to allow full development in all the dimensions of our character, not just one or two dimensions. The last two words of this verse, wanting nothing, in verse 4, bears out this reading or this interpretation of this verse. The word wanting, we ordinarily think of, well, we want something, we desire something. Well, the word wanting here does not mean desiring. The word wanting here means lacking. It means we get to this point of development where we are lacking nothing, is the correct thought. In other words, we want to cheerfully persevere until it finishes every dimension of our character development. If we faithfully allow this work to continue in us, our Christian characters will eventually lack nothing. If we don't complain, if we don't rebel, if we don't give up, if we don't throw in the towel, so to speak, if we persevere, if we cooperate to the best of our ability with the process, it will work. It's guaranteed to work. At that point, we will be ready to receive our perfect spiritual bodies to match our perfectly developed characters. So what's our takeaway from these verses 2, 3, and 4, which we've kind of tied together as a package? Well, when we are surrounded with a wide variety of tests that prove our loyalty, we should consider every single one of those a spiritual joy, even though most often the flesh will not. We should never complain or murmur about a single trial, because we absolutely know that if we continue to receive each trial with cheerful constancy, face each one with the right attitude, and endeavoring to make the right choices, we will grow in Christian character. Character growth happens if we face trials with a positive attitude and we strive to make the right choices when faced with those tests. Now, we've obviously spent considerable time analyzing and discussing verses 2, 3, and 4. And these are the core verses that include, obviously, the theme text and the immediate surrounding context of the theme. But we suggest that the remaining verses in chapter 1 are all relevant to our theme text. So we want to consider verses 5 through 27. We're going to go through the rest of the chapter is our hope, our desire. Our approach will be to read each verse, or in some cases, in many cases, actually we're going to consider a cluster or a group of verses and then offer a few comments. Verses 5 through 8. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Now we might ask ourselves here, why is James discussing wisdom? And why is he discussing the need for us to have or to gain that wisdom? Well, we suggested earlier that what builds our character, or on the other side of that coin, what damages or erodes character, depends on the choices that we make. Choosing not to compromise with the flesh is a right choice. Choosing not to complain is a right choice. Making right choices builds our character. Making wrong choices damages or erodes our character. And that's where godly wisdom comes into the picture. Godly wisdom is what guides us into making the right choices and avoiding making the wrong choices or the less desirable choices, the less advantageous choices. Here's the problem. The problem is you and I don't have any godly wisdom. You and I weren't born with it. We have to acquire it. And that's why James says that we need to ask God for it. Now, to better understand this concept of godly wisdom, let's consider King Solomon. Now, as we all know, early in his kingly administration, King Solomon asked God for wisdom, and God granted it. And we read of this account in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 8 to 13 primarily. Singling out one of those verses, 1 Kings 3:28, we read there, "And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king," here talking about King Solomon, "had judged. And they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment." Now we note in this verse, 1 Kings 3:28, that godly wisdom means the exercise of godly judgment, godly discretion. Exercising godly judgment or discretion is an acquired skill. When James says that we are to ask for wisdom, he is suggesting that we ask God for good judgment. Obviously, God does not just reply to our request by opening up our heads and pouring it in. We all know that's not how it works. But rather, as we've said, we need to acquire it. And how do we do that? How do we acquire godly discretion, godly judgment that we can use in making decisions when we are tested? The book of Proverbs, among other places, gives us the answer. Proverbs tells us that in order to get this godly discretion, this acquired skill, we need to follow 3 steps. And we're going to take a look at each of these 3. And they all come from the book of Proverbs. Let's start with Proverbs 9:10. 9:10. "The fear of Jehovah is the beginning of wisdom." Now, to acquire godly discretion or judgment, we want to have a supreme reverence for God. In other words, we must want to do things his way. We need to see God as possessing this high skill, this thing called godly judgment. We need to see him as possessing that quality. And we also need to see him as being willing to give that skill to us if we ask. Now, conversely, we have to have a sense of our own weakness, our own insufficiency, our own unqualifications or lack of qualifications to make good and right decisions. In every test, we must recognize that we need help to decide aright. And what is that help? James is telling us that help is God. So the first thing is supreme reverence. Let's look at our second step from Proverbs 2:6. 2:6. "For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding." Now, in order to acquire good judgment on any subject, we must get not only knowledge, but we must strive for and try to achieve the understanding of that knowledge. Knowledge without understanding is of little, if any, value. Exercising godly wisdom can't be done unless we know something about God's will, his revealed mind given to us, as we know, through his word. That means we need to seek the knowledge of God. And what that means is engage ourselves in reverent study of his revealed mind, his revealed word. Seeking the knowledge and seeking the understanding of God's revealed mind takes work. It takes energy. It's not automatic. It takes time. It takes study. It takes engaging ourselves in his revealed mind and word, as we all know. So that's the second step, is to seek the knowledge, and not just knowledge, but the understanding of the revealed mind of God. The third step we'd like to read from Proverbs 3:6, and this is the BBE, the Bible in Basic English Version. Proverbs 3:6, it reads, "In all your ways give ear to him, and he will make straight your footsteps." In other words, here, what the wise man is saying is, first listen to God's voice. Listen to that voice in everything that we do and follow that counsel. We're talking about obedience. We're talking about application. So in context here, this does not necessarily mean seeking for the removal of a test or of a trial. Rather, we are trying to seek the right use of that test. We are seeking how to manage that test or that experience. We are seeking how to make a right decision in that test or that experience. This means pray for and seek more of the Holy Spirit, God's holy influence. That's the transforming influence, the transforming of the renewing of our minds upon all these great and eternal promises that we are given. So we're seeking more of his Spirit is one way in which we give ear to him and carry out this obedience, this application. Now, another way that we apply this particular third step to get godly judgment is to recognize and follow the captain of our salvation. Follow his example, as we are counseled in numerous texts in the Bible. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 30, Colossians chapter 2, verse 3, and many others. Jesus, as has already been pointed out at this convention, is the personification of God's wisdom. So if we follow in the footsteps of Jesus, we will be exercising that godly wisdom. Now, another way that we can achieve and carry out this good judgment can be through the assistance of our brethren, fellow new creatures in Christ Jesus, dialoguing with them, seeking input. Oftentimes we seek wisdom, when we seek counsel from our brethren as to what we might do when faced with a particular situation. So there's the 3 steps to acquire godly judgment. Number 1, supreme reverence for God, realizing that he's the only one that has that supreme reverence, that supreme wisdom, and that he's willing to give it to us if we ask. Secondly, the earnest study of his revealed mind through his word in prayer. And thirdly, the obedience or the application, seeking more of his Spirit, seeking to walk, follow the example of our Lord Jesus, following the example of the other apostles and prophets in Scripture, perhaps counseling with our brethren. Now let's return to James chapter 1, verses 5 to 8 that we read just a few moments ago, because we want to say a few more things about it. James says there in those verses that we read that God will never upbraid. Now, what does it mean to upbraid? It means to rebuff. So God will never upbraid or rebuff our request for godly judgment. Friends, stop for a moment and imagine this. God's wisdom is there for the asking. Friends, there's an inexhaustible supply of God's wisdom that's there literally on a silver platter that's available to us. God doesn't put any limits on the number of times that we ask. He doesn't put any limits on the number of topics that we ask about. Ask all you want. Ask as many times as you want. It's there for the taking. We dare say, friends, that asking for God's wisdom, and I will freely admit this in my own case, freely and repeatedly, that asking for God's wisdom is probably one of the most underutilized opportunities and blessings that we have available to us. Now, James also cautions in these verses that we must ask in faith. Now, faith here is the Greek word, once again, that we mentioned earlier, same word, it means conviction or convictions. To ask in faith means that we strongly believe in and sincerely intend to use the guidance that we are asking for. Now, to ask in faith means that we sincerely want God's instruction. We really want to know what his instruction is, his guidance in a particular situation. To ask in faith means that we have every intent of accepting that counsel when we receive it and to obey it to the very best of our ability. Now, on the other side of that coin, if we not ask in faith, that would mean that we ask God for it and then we waver as to whether we use it or not. Well, I'm not sure I like that advice. James says that's a vacillating, that's a wishy-washy heart attitude. That's a double-minded person. And God is not going to bless that double-minded person with his wisdom. James says that God will not entrust his wisdom to a double-minded person. In other words, God is not going to give us his judgment. He's not going to give us that wisdom, that godly discretion that we so desire, unless he knows that our hearts are honest and that we have every intent to use that discretion, that judgment, that guidance, regardless of what it costs the flesh. Verses 9 through 11. Let the brother of low degree rejoice in that he is exalted, but the rich in that he is made low. Because as the flower of the grass he shall pass away. For the sun is no sooner risen with a burning heat, but it withereth the grass, and the flower thereof falleth. And the grace of the fashion of it persisteth, or perisheth rather. And so also shall the rich man fade away in his ways. Now these verses 9 through 11 tell us that humility is essential for us to be exalted. Humility is essential for us to grow in character likeness of our Lord. If we face our tests with a humble appreciation of our own weaknesses, our own shortcomings, our own deficiencies, and we ask for help, we will get the help that we need. We will grow. If we are of a humble mind, we will feel our own need, and we will be exalted because we will get the help that we need, that we ask for, and that we will be elevated with growth in God likeness, in Christ likeness, is part of what James is telling us here. But conversely, if we are feeling rich, remember the text in Revelation, I am rich and need nothing. Conversely, if we are feeling rich, if we have a prideful attitude, our tests are going to do us little and likely no good at all. In other words, if we face our tests, our trials, with an attitude of self-sufficiency, of an attitude of self-reliance, an attitude of self-complacency, that, I've got everything I need here to make this decision. I don't need any help. I don't need to ask. Our trials are almost guaranteed to fail of their purpose. When the self-sufficient face trials, when they are faced with strong tests, like a scorching sun that James analogizes to here, they will wither. They will regress. They will go backwards. James was obviously a good student of Jesus, as part of what came out in yesterday's remarks on our overview of the book of James. But James was obviously a good student of Jesus because Jesus taught this very same lesson, the critical, the vital element of humility as part of the growth character process formula in Luke 14:11, where he says there in part, whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. So humility in trial leads to character advancement, character growth. But pride in trial, feeling self-sufficient, feeling like we've got all we need to make the right decision, leads to character damage and ultimately to character failure. Verse 12. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Lord hath promised to them that love him. As we all know, trials and testings take time to work. Character growth is not an event. Character growth is a process. And we get the victor's crown only if we see trials through to the end, and we don't try to I just want this over with. If that's our attitude in trial, it's probably not going to work real well. If our sole focus in a trial or a test is just to get rid of it, that trial is not likely to have its designed beneficial effect. And let's face it, friends, a lot of times the flesh is saying, how soon can I get past this experience? I just want to get past this. But that's not the right attitude. If we truly love God, we will want to endure in the school of Christ to the very end. That's what James is telling us. Endure to the end. But if we quit school, as we all know, if we quit school before we reach the very end of that curriculum, then we don't get a diploma. We don't get the crown, James says. Verses 13 to 15. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempteth no man. But each man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own lust and enticed. And then the lust, when it hath conceived, beareth sin, and the sin, when it is full grown, bringeth forth death. Brother Dan just referenced this text or part of it here in his lesson that preceded ours. And so we see here in verses 13 to 15, these are referring to temptations. These are referring to enticements to do evil, to do sin, to do wrong. God does allow us, every one of us, to be tested to determine our character, our loyalty. But God does not entice us. He does not tempt us to sin. That which entices us to sin arises from Satan, who works through our fallen flesh and its weaknesses. That's that perimeter that Brother Dan talked about, those perimeter defenses around our character. Make no mistake, Satan knows our sinful propensities. He knows how to make sin attractive to the flesh. Satan entices us to sin by using external influences. They can be many. They can be worldly friends. They can be worldly language. It can be the media. It can be television. It can be a number of things. More often than not, our sanctified consciences will warn us in advance that we are about to step into sin. That's why we have a conscience. It's that early warning signal. You're about to step into sin. James tells us that James tells us what we should do, I should say, what we must do if we are faced with a test of entering into sin or not entering into it. For the most part, we know what our weaknesses are, and we know what triggers them, and we know what causes us to succumb or to submit to them. Our task is not to stimulate our weaknesses. Our task, of course, is to resist the sin. Do not entertain sin in our minds. Do not allow ourselves, in other words, to become drawn into it, which can happen very gradually. It can happen very gradually by rationalizing it. In other words, justifying it, kind of looking at, well, yeah, maybe it's not so bad. Friends, resistance is a choice. It's a conscious choice. If we don't take that threshold step of resistance, we put ourselves on a slippery slope, is what James is telling us. And where does that slippery slope end? It ends in the pit, so to speak. It ends in death. Verses 16 to 18. Do not err, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, that cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. Of his own will begat he us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Now, in these verses 16 through 18, James is telling us the importance of God's word of truth in our consecrated lives. And again, he's emphasizing this point that he's already introduced to us earlier in this chapter. God created the light. He is the Father of lights. He is the Father of the word of truth. He gave us that light as the perfect gift, as the complete gift. God's truth is perfect. And the reason it's perfect is because it has virtually everything that we need as new creatures in Christ Jesus. Everything. He gave us not only his word of truth, he gave us the resources. Look at all the resources we have to help to understand his word. He's given those too. That's part of the light. Now, don't err. In other words, don't be deceived into believing or relying on anything else to promote our character growth. Don't be deceived or drawn into any other source of information, any man-made information, any man-made theories. God's truth, James says, is what begat us. God's truth is what started that spiritual impulse of life in us. It's what commenced the new creature. The truth is what did that. God's counsel is also what will sustain us in our tests, our trials. God's word is the force that can and will transform us. God's truth is what will develop us into the choicest place in his creation that James here identifies as the first fruits. That's quite a choice place. Make no error, make no mistake. God's word is the only influence that can and will develop us, the new creature. It's the only thing that will develop the new creation. Verses 19 to 21. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Wherefore, Lay apart all filthiness and superfluity of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word which is able to save your souls. Now, these verses 19 through 21 distinguish very sharply between exercising God's will versus exercising self-will, and how we might have an indicator of how we know that we might just be exercising self-will instead of God's will. There's two things here that indicate that we are exercising or we are about to exercise self-will. First, we speak our own words. In other words, we speak our own mind. We speak our own opinions instead of God's mind, instead of God's word. You know, that's very easy to do. Just make up things. Just speak them. The second indicator that we are exercising self-will is that we manifest anger in our trials. Now, James here in these verses is not talking about godly anger. He's not talking about righteous anger. He is referring to human anger. He is referring to selfish human anger. Exercising fallen human anger is not promoting the righteousness, the purposes of God, which of course is Christian character. James says that we need to separate ourselves from all such filthiness of the flesh. The tendency to speak our own opinions, our own minds, our own wills, or the tendency to become angry when things don't go the way that we want them to go. James says we need to separate ourselves from all such filthiness of the flesh and all such wickedness. If we are in the habit of exercising self-will, when we are tested, when we are put under stress, we need to strive to break that habit. Again, exercising self-will or not exercising self-will is a choice. Now, as we just read in the previous set of verses, God has given us his word, his light, his instruction. If we expect to grow in Christian character in our trials, we must allow God's influence to reign supreme. And furthermore, if we want to grow as new creatures, as embryo new creatures in Christ Jesus, we need to strive to avoid reacting with self-will in our trials, which we know is not easy. The flesh is always rising up to assert itself. It's a constant battle. God's instruction and not our own fallen fleshly influences is what's going to save us, James is telling us at the end of these several verses. In other words, God's own instruction is what's going to protect our souls. It's what's going to protect and preserve and advance and promote the new creature growth and development. Verses 22 to 25. But be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. For if any be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man beholding his natural face in a glass. For he beholdeth himself and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. Now, we can easily deceive ourselves into thinking that we are okay. We're okay because we're in the truth. That's a pretty comfortable place, isn't it? Pretty comfortable feeling. I'm in the truth. Well, that can be a false sense of security. To be a true Christian means more than just being in the truth. To be a true Christian means that we are not just receiving the truth. It means more than just receiving information. It means more than just being surrounded by truth influences and truth instruction. It means it takes into consideration this idea of meditating upon the instruction, prayerfully reflecting upon the instruction. And why so? Well, in the immediate context of these verses, meditation or reflection will quite often reveal defects in our character. And that's the point that James is going after here. identifying defects in our character, defects that we identify ourselves in our own character. Our responsibility here, James says, is to take that awareness that comes to our mind and apply ourselves to doing something to correct it. Take corrective action to the very best of our ability. He draws a beautiful analogy here in these verses. James says, don't be like the person who looks in the mirror and he sees something wrong. You know, your tie's crooked, your hair's out of place, it's not combed, you have the wrong shirt on. He sees these defects, and James says, then he just walks away from the mirror and forgets all about what he just saw in himself. He says, don't be like that person. Recognizing something amiss in our characters, once again, presents us with a test. What shall we do when we identify, or when a defect, through the study and meditation and reflection of God's word, identifies such a defect or a shortcoming or weakness in our characters? What shall we do? That's the test. There's the choice. The perfect law of liberty is the law of Christ. What is that law? That's the royal law that we discussed yesterday, the law of love, love for God and love for others. You know, if we love God supremely and our neighbors as ourselves, as we are counseled to do, we will want to develop perfect love for both our Heavenly Father and our neighbors. We want to use that divine instruction to identify and go further than just identify, but we want to go and rectify anything within us that does not reflect godly love, that royal love, that supreme love. Striving to bend and conform ourselves to that perfect law of love is how we are supremely blessed. Whether we address the defects that we see in ourselves, or whether we choose to ignore or bypass or minimize those defects, once again, is a choice. Verses 26 and 27. If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. You know, we all have said injurious things, hurtful things to others that we later regret. The things that we regret, the things that we identify as being wrong, is not what James is here referring to. The bridle here that he refers to is a restraint. So James is talking about fault finding. He's talking about things like evil speaking and other things that we do not restrain or try to restrain, and we don't even regret them after they come out, after we do them. That's the kind of thing he's talking about. Uncomplimentary things that we simply justify or rationalize rather than try to restrain or regret if we fall into them. Things that have a measure of our heart's approval, wrong things, are the things that James here is talking about. He talks about a man's religion. What is your religion and mine? Isn't it not the truth? God's revealed mind. So pure religion, the truth, is given to you and me for one reason, and that's to make our hearts, our minds, our wills more godlike. If we seek the truth for any other reason, if there's any other motive for which we are seeking the mind and heart of God, what James is telling us here is that it's vain, it's empty, it's worthless. Our pursuit of the truth should be developing in us, again, that royal law of love. What does that royal law look like? It looks like mercy. It looks and acts like generosity. It looks and behaves like compassion. You know, truth should call us. Our religion, our truth, should cause us to want to help others in need, which, of course, is the entire groaning creation. And is that not why you are laying down your lives? Is that not why I'm laying down or trying to lay down my life? That's who James is talking. He's talking here about the groaning creation. He identifies them as the fatherless and the widows who are afflicted. He's talking about this groaning creation for which our hearts should yearn. for the qualifications to be able to assist them. You know, if we find ourselves becoming spotted with a worldly spirit, with a selfish spirit, once again, James comes back to this thread. We need to take corrective action. We must betake ourselves to the throne of grace and ask for that blemish to be removed by the blood of Christ. We need to do the best that we can to keep that robe, that priceless robe of righteousness that's been given to us, wrinkle-free and also blemish-free, uncontaminated. Well, let's bring our lesson to a close in the next minute. In closing, James is impressing on us a very pragmatic lesson. Remember, we said yesterday, James is a very pragmatic Christian, very practical. He's giving us a relatively easy to understand lesson. What we regularly allow or what we regularly not allow to occupy our minds and our hearts will determine our ultimate reward. The tests that we face and the choices that we make every day will have much to do with our destiny. As Brother Mike just mentioned here just a short while ago from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and we think it bears repeating, Ralph Waldo Emerson so well captured this lesson. Sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. And sow a character and reap a destiny. Someone also well said, and I don't know who came up with this, but someone also well said that practice does not make perfect. Practice with correction makes perfect.